Thank you all for joining us today for the fifth and final installment of our 5-part webinar series. This session will focus on best practices for boards of directors. Today's webinar is co-presented by William Musgrove, Senior Vice President and Managing Director, and Farah Salim, Consulting Associate. Since joining the firm over 10 years ago, Lori has served hundreds of client organizations. Lori has more than 30 years of experience in consulting, fundraising, and nonprofit management for public and private universities, medical centers, and cultural institutions. Co-presenter Farah Salim joined GGNA in January 2012 after previously serving as the Executive Director for the Kidsium of Health and Science and Emerging Children's Museum in Springfield, Illinois. I welcome any questions you have during today's session, and we'll answer those questions in the time remaining at the end of the hour. To address a question to Lori and Farah, please use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. Select all participants from the drop-down menu and send us your questions. Questions we do not answer today will be addressed in a follow-up message we send next week, along with a recording of the session and the presentation slides, as a short survey to gain your feedback about our webinars. Thank you for joining us today. We'll now turn it over to Farah to get us started.
Thank you, Catherine, and welcome to you all. I also wanted to say a special thanks to those who have joined us, not only for this particular webinar, but for others within the small nonprofit series that GGNA has hosted. And we've had a delightful time, and hopefully you've been able to glean some helpful insights and tips and tools and techniques to assist you with your own organizational development program. One other thing I do want to mention to follow up, please feel free, as this is our last webinar, to contact us with questions or more information if you so desire about other topics, or just to talk about some philanthropy ideas for small or medium-sized nonprofit organizations that maybe hadn't covered. And we will be happy to talk with you about that. So let's get started, since we have such a lot to cover in our agenda. Lori and I want to do is provide you with a broad and expansive overview so that you have a foundation for your organization to kind of build, recruit, and expand your current board of directors or new board of directors. Methods to do this is by learning what the fundamental responsibilities of boards are, how to get those high-performing board members, and to essentially build the philanthropic expertise of your board. This, of course, as we know, is one of the most important elements of being a board member. And then really understand the expectations of board members, expectations of you as the nonprofit leadership. And we hope to leave you with some other informational tips and best practices, as well as at the end we will offer some tools and templates. But before we move on, I do want to say and stress that the majority of you on this call are from small nonprofit organizations who obviously most likely have small nonprofit boards. But throughout this conversation that we're going to have this afternoon, please try to focus on the fact that you don't have to think like a small nonprofit board. Think big, and hopefully we can replicate what big national boards are able to accomplish for your particular organization. If you think too big, though, you have to know and understand the basics of board responsibilities, and essentially that's governance. Governance means to provide direction, but not necessarily to provide direct management, which is what you have your organization's CEO or president there to do. A board is essentially there to establish tone at the top and to kind of filter down throughout the organization the vision, the oversight, and the direction, which the organizational staff and volunteers and clients can all kind of understand and move forward with. This is basically done through oversight, and oversight is establishing those broad policies and objectives, things like risk management, strategic direction setting, and the all-important thing, complying with law. The most important element of being a board member is not only fiduciary responsibilities, but ensuring that an organization is ethical and compliant, again, with state or national laws. So you are seeing the person and persons who select, appoint, and support the CEO, the head honcho. This includes hiring, firing, and promoting. Move on to ensuring the availability of adequate financial resources, which, again, besides fiduciary responsibilities, it's not only fundraising, which is what a lot of people assume once they become a board member. It's also managing those current operations. Of course, approving annual budgets, which goes hand in hand with setting salaries and compensation of organizational management. And something I want to point out is the second to last bullet, accounting the stakeholders for organization's performance. Stakeholders can be anyone within your organization or that your organization touches. This includes volunteers, other board members, which I think is important to remember, and also the community at large. You want to hold your organization credible to those who you go out to seek money and funds and resources from. And I think that the biggest difference to apply between small boards and big boards is filling in those gaps in terms of resources and funding and employees, quite frankly. Small boards and board members have to sometimes fill in gaps and help support a function that may not necessarily be filled within the organization. And so now that you know what a board is responsible for, Lori is going to share with you some of the characteristics of those successful boards.
Thank you, Farah. What you see in front of you are simply a listing of those things that are considered to be good practice for a board. And most of it is very common sense, but it goes back a bit to what Farah said, is helping board members, whether at a large organization or a small one, understand their role, understand expectations, and we're going to talk about that a bit later. I want to draw your attention to three of these on the slide we're currently looking at, which are the priorities. What are we trying to accomplish? Who will do what in moving you forward toward those goals? And what is the goal? What is the board's role in advancing these activities? As Farah has noted, there is a fine line between over-management and under-management, or over-involvement, under-involvement of a board member. I think the board itself has to understand what it hopes to achieve on behalf of the organization and within collaboration with leadership, the institutional executive leadership. That goes to what is their role and what are their expectations or involvements and the institutions. And so we would encourage you that I'm sure, I would guess that most of you already have a board in place. And so this may want to embark on a bit of self-study or an internal review to evaluate your own board operations against some of these characteristics and begin discussions with executive leadership as well as voluntary leadership to determine where you are on the spectrum and whether or not a more formal self-study might be appropriate. You go to the next slide.
Thank you. To talk a little bit more now that we have some of those expectations, like Lori was mentioning, of the characteristics. This is a great way to kind of segue into how do you evaluate and what the end goal of an effective board should look like as compared to evaluating what your current board it looks like in reality. Sometimes this is a wake-up moment for your organization and for your board members individually. And I think that one way to do this, and we have here some mechanisms for regular evaluations, but one way to do this is to conduct an audit of your board to see where those missing gaps are that I talked about earlier, and to see how your particular organization can fix them. Because next to an organization's leadership, the board is one of the most important elements of a successful and functioning organization. To this audit, you ask questions and glean answers to find out the level of commitment that your board members currently have, not only for your organization, but to other organizations. I know that I came from a community in which board members were on a lot of different organizational boards, and so you have to really ask and evaluate what the role of that particular individual is serving in terms of your board. Is it really just a placement because he or she is a community leader and provides a lot of resources, or is he or she really passionate about your mission and your cause? Also, the partnership that exists between your leadership and the board. This is a critical communication problem. Ensuring that each of the parties involved understands the roles and responsibilities of the other. As we had mentioned, the board is responsible for hiring and firing and promoting of the CEO and president. So it is critical that they understand and operate as a team what they are trying to do with the organization. Of course, that carries on to, is there clarity about decision-making authority? You don't want to be caught in a position where a president or CEO is making decisions that maybe should have gone to committees within the board or the board as a whole. Moving on to a couple more little tidbits about board evaluations. Another thing which we have provided in the end of our presentation through our tools and templates, a type of report card. And I really like this tool, and I've worked a lot with organizations who have implemented or started to implement a report card. And this is to essentially assess an individual board member. And some organizations actually have the individual board member conduct this for themselves, and then also start this conversation with the not only with the board president, but perhaps with also the nonprofit organization's president or CEO. And this is, again, another way to really facilitate that conversation and to keep the doors of communication open between the board and the leadership of the organization. And this report card is essentially to look to see, how people are fitting in within the board. Are they achieving their roles and responsibilities? And do they actually know what their roles and responsibilities are? And Lori's going to talk more later about recruiting effective board members. But before you recruit effective board members, you need to provide them with the roles and responsibilities to ensure that everyone is successful. Speaking of makeup of boards, you essentially see if you are representative of your community or of your clientele. You need to be a little bit more strategic about placement when you're a small organization because you don't have as many places to fill necessarily. One women's volunteer organization that I worked with, a problem with term limits. There were board members that were on there for 10+ years. And of course, as they wanted to get fresh new blood, there was a lot of controversy because the new members wanted to opt in a little bit more updated way. They wanted to also think about and consider email votes. And the older generation was very, very anti-email votes. So take a look at your population of your board and to see what makes sense. Of course, some organizations, this doesn't fit within their Robert's Rules of Order, but try and figure out what really makes sense in terms of not only your board, but how this also plays into the programs and the services offered by your organization. And this is done through active feedback mechanisms going back to the conversation between nonprofit leadership and the board. And so over to Lori to talk about recruiting those high-performing board members.
Yes, thank you, Farah. I do want to add one point to the question of board evaluations. These are most often successful when it's something the board itself undertakes, in collaboration with the executive leadership. I don't believe we want to imply that staff should embark on this independent of engagement with the board. So the questions that we pose here are simply the kinds of organizational directions and, again, and the environment you want to create and how you want to work with your individual board members and the board as a group. So, recruiting high-performing board members. We've said several times here, deciding what it is you are looking for in a board member well before you begin to even build your candidate list is important. And we've identified some of the considerations for you here on the slide. I will tell you that when institutional leadership, the president, the director of development, or vice president are frustrated with their board because they're not doing enough or they're not doing what we hoped they would do, it often turns out it's because there were different expectations from the institution for board members, and the board was not didn't fully understand what was expected of them. And this occurs in large, sophisticated organizations as well as smaller, grassroots, sophisticated organizations in delivering their mission. So what is it you want the board to do? What is your expectation of their behavior, i.e., how many board members meetings are they expected to attend? How many committee meetings? How many committees do you hope they will serve on, and why? Very realistic of expectations or consideration of the time required. So you also want to think about the fit with the culture institution and the culture of the board. Ferris referenced what might be a generational difference in terms of how people prefer to communicate. So you need to think about the culture, the recent history, the traditions, not necessarily to preserve them for all eternity, but understand that as you introduce new folks to your board, it is going to impact what you might call the chemistry, and you want to make sure that that impact is a positive one. Cannot emphasize the importance of making sure that when you invite someone to your board, that your organization is, if not the top philanthropic priority, then certainly one of the top three. Again, over and over again, you see institutions who are disappointed that the local, very wealthy individual who agrees to join the board does not step up with a 6-7 figure commitment. Misinterpreting that joining the board, that person was indicating that their philanthropy would follow. So we have to make sure through our conversations in the recruitment process that the individual being recruited is committed to this organization. Obviously, want to make sure that there's some capacity to make gifts, recognizing that we often recruit individuals not so much because of their financial capacity, but because of other things they bring to the table. Now, having said that, you certainly want them to make gifts, gifts that are commensurate with their ability, and avoid having folks on your board because of the time that they're giving. We appreciate their time, there's no question about that, but as Ferris referenced earlier, you have a finite number of seats at the board table, and every one of them has to be filled with those who bring the most impact and who demonstrate their commitment to your organization. Other things, do they know something about the organization's work? Are they committed to that? Now, during the recruitment process, again, as Farrah has suggested, we need to make sure that we have up-to-date institutional documents, whether that includes bylaws, an actual position description for the board position you're asking this person to assume, that the goals and objectives for both the organization and the board are clear, and that there are metrics for evaluating success. The time commitment, as I mentioned just a minute ago, we again really have to be honest with folks. We know it's not just 3 meetings a year. There may be committee meetings to attend. There are going to be phone calls in between formal sessions. There are going to be things to be read and responded to. They may be very often asked to attend events or gatherings that are important to the institution. So don't shy away from being honest about that. And if the person says, I simply can't do that, then be gracious about it, but suggest perhaps another time would be better for them to participate as a board member. And of course, the all-important, make sure they understand the expectation for philanthropic commitments. Absolutely at the annual giving level, and certainly periodically for a major initiative, whether it be a formal campaign or some other more specific fundraising activity. Some organizations ask us, should there be a specific dollar amount in the document, in the job description? You could argue both sides of that. I guess I would suggest that, again, you shy away from it in writing, because if it's too high, you're going to turn off some folks. If it's too low, you're going to leave money on the table. So I think it goes back to the recruitment conversation. It's not just one meeting, but it may be a series of meetings going to that to make sure the fit is there. So that take a series of conversations to make sure that particularly the CEO of your organization and the chair or president of the board feel that this individual is going to be the right fit. Again, what do we do to make sure our trustees are successful, or our directors, and make sure they have access to the resources they need? Now, those should be appropriate resources. They should be asking staff for daily reports or for job descriptions or salary information on staff, but appropriate resources that are going to make the board, help the board's work be successful. Certainly the recruitment, the formal invitation within a multi-step conversation should be conducted by the board chair and institutional CEO. There may be one or so other persons are involved in that because they might bring the candidate to the table. But this is an important step for both the individual and for the institution. So we want to make sure that we are presenting the invitation in an appropriate manner. The next bullet about allowing the board to determine its own membership is really meant to avoid situations where associated organizations, committees, guilds, etc., assume ownership of one or more seats on the board. I do have a client that finds it difficult to break a tradition of having a trustee appointed every year by an external group that doesn't really align with the institutional objectives and vision. So changing these kinds of things takes time, and you need to have a goal on the horizon. Try to gain that control so that you make sure that the board members again sitting around the table are those people who are not, I'm not implying they are rubber stamp people, who understand the vision and the mission and have the ability to help advance that mission and vision. It's always a good idea to assign an experienced trustee at your organization to sort of mentor a newer one. Very often it takes, remember, some of these trustees are only on campus or at your organization 3, 4, maybe 6 times a year. And so their ability to absorb what they need to absorb takes some time. Having a more experienced trustee mentor them can be very helpful to increase their learning curve and get fully functional more quickly. Critical is that the president and CEO has a strong relationship with every trustee. Not an exclusive relationship, but a very strong one. He or she, this is the group that is going to help the CEO be successful. They should have the CEO's best interests and success in their minds. And so I have seen instances in my career where this did not occur. It simply simply makes the board and the organization overall less effective. An important part, and we're going to talk about this in just a bit, in enhancing the philanthropic expertise of the board is, in fact, their own cultivation and solicitation for gifts. And we encourage you to consider cultivation and solicitation of board members be it taken as carefully and strategically as you would solicit another individual. We can sometimes slip into complacency. We can slip into the thinking that this is obligatory and therefore we don't really need to invest time in it. That is, to do that course is dangerous and risky. So we need to take this work seriously. You may want to have a conversation with the board around annual giving to see if there's a gift that the board could collaborate on that, again, is important to the institution, perhaps goes to your bottom line, but it's something that they can own rather than the unrestricted fund, which I acknowledge we all need. With cultivation solicitation, stewardship of board member gifts are very important. It's an old truism, but it's true that your past donors are your best prospects for future donors. Your trustees or insiders know more about the institution than anybody else, but perhaps the president and other senior leadership. We should be gracious and appreciative, not overly so, but just make sure they understand that their gifts are appreciated by the institution. I think often institutions overlook is techniques and mechanisms to help build community or sociability among board members. You don't want them, particularly if you have a national board or a board that is not geographically close, you want folks to come into your organization, have the board meeting, and then leave. Frankly, it makes them a little bit less effective as a board because there's not the opportunity to discuss freely and openly, to collaborate on ideas, not to gang up on the CEO, but really to simply be a better functioning organization within themselves. So you can do that by having social activities surrounding board members or other gatherings where board members may be present. I have a number of clients who make up board books that have photographs and a little bit of bio information about their trustees, which is helpful just to see a face and put a name with it. Another valuable strategy is to create opportunities for board members to meet the people that work at your organization in the program areas, and to meet some of those that are served, whether they be students or other kinds of clients, perhaps patients in an appropriate fashion, certainly physicians and faculty members, musicians, curators, etc. Again, it's simply going to increase their knowledge of the institution and may spark additional thinking about their own philanthropic investment. So don't be afraid of that. It does need to be managed. Hardly I know, but our trustees and directors may not actually think about your organization on a daily basis between meetings. And be sure there are effective mechanisms, not overly time-consuming and not just simply busy work, but to keep the trustees and directors engaged in knowing what's happening. It may be that there's a periodic email that goes out from the CEO, or he or she makes a phone call, or someone in the development office goes by to provide an update on some of the latest activities. Again, just make sure that they have that sort of top-of-mind awareness of the institution and it doesn't get lost among all the other competing issues that they deal with every day. It goes back to knowing people. They're not just a group of anonymous folks, but they are all individuals. They have particular interests. They may indeed have hot buttons, both positive and negative, that you need to be aware of. And in fact, you may find that you engage them in a long-term conversation about that hot button with hopes of either taking advantage of it or resolving it. And of course, as I mentioned, they are individuals, and we want to make sure that they feel appreciated as individuals. A couple more tips, and then I'll pass back to Farah, is and when you begin to create your candidate list for trustees, first look at, obviously, the network of current board members, friends, and colleagues. Now, a little word of caution on this is that you want to approach this in such a way that if you have a meeting with a board member to say, do you have some folks that we might think about bringing onto the board, that individual doesn't turn around and telephone their friend or colleague, or the next time they see them at an event or elsewhere, that they don't say, hey, XYZ organization is going to invite you to join the board. What do you think about that? I mean, that's it does happen, doesn't happen often, but you do have to set these kind of conversations to control for that. Think also about, what does your organization need? Now, of course, money is up there, but do you need folks who represent geographical diversity or diversity of thought, ethnicity? You want your board to reflect the clientele that you serve and that you work with. Is there particular expertise you need, such as law or IT or nursing, or so whatever you are about in your organization, are there some knowledge gaps or skill gaps that can be met through the board recruitment? You may also want to do some benchmarking by comparing folks on boards that are like you, either to begin to develop a profile of what you'd like to bring on your board, not necessarily individuals, and also to do a reality check of, are we getting too many board members who already serve on boards of institutions like ours? And that's where you have to go back to competing philanthropic priorities. If I sit on two boards as an individual and they have similar missions, where do I put my philanthropic investment? So that's, inevitably it's going to reduce the gifts to one or the other or both. I'll stop now and pass it on to Farah.
Thanks, Lori. And so Lori was able to provide you with those methods of recruiting the board members, the high-performing board members. But once you have them on board, how do you really engage them and build their philanthropic expertise? And what we're talking about essentially is fundraising, which, as we know, fundraising and governance are two key points of serving on a board. And, discuss some of the reasons why board members might feel uncomfortable. A lot of times people are uncomfortable speaking about money in general. And they assume that it's basically going up to strangers and asking for money and not really having that basis of a conversation in terms of relationship building. And as Lori mentioned earlier, this kind of feeds into what we call the solicitation and cultivation process, which people aren't picked at random. Donors are picked because of their association with the organization, or if there is no previous association with the organization, kind of their likes, or as Lori had called, their hot button passions, something that they would like to become more involved or engaged in. And so with this information in mind, kind of ensuring that a list that is very backed by evidence, and not just monetarily, but also how engaged might this particular donor be to not only provide the resources, but also board members should be responsible for also recruiting other board members as well. I think a significant point of contention, if you will, is that in terms of fundraising, is that the ask is a request, or they think that the ask is a request, or just kind of a handout. And I really think that by changing this position and looking at the board, talking to others, talking to colleagues, talking to friends, talking to neighbors and like-minded individuals, having them understand that it is an investment. I think that an investment kind of offers that illusion. It is something more than just a change that will happen once. It is part of engagement, investing in experience. And as we say here at the last bullet point, avoiding the transactional perspective. That is really important. I think that once board members know how to conversate effectively and to share that mission, and as Lori said, you have to be well-versed on the mission, and that is kind of the first step in terms of understanding fundraising and how to make it a more successful venture for your particular organization. Not that you are selling someone. You are actually asking them to become involved and to be a change maker and to invest in an experience. Also, this is part and parcel with understanding that there will be a support structure. That is key for an organization to provide for their board. And this could be everything, as we'll move on, this could be everything to what I like to call the ride-along. You wouldn't send a rookie out to go to a huge shootout without knowing what to do, how to shoot a gun, how to do all of the things that are kind of necessary in building up to be able to go out on your own. An opportunity to do that is through board retreats or these ride-alongs in which a board member can go with the chairman of the board or the president or the director of development and see kind of how the process is. And of course, it's just a small look into the entire cycle of cultivation and solicitation, but does offer that opportunity to how to start a conversation. I think that also something that we mentioned here are those teachable moments. This goes hand in hand with note that board members typically have a pulse on the community and might know of other people that the board members should or could contact. And keeping these conversations between the CEO, the administrative team, the clientele, all of these are factors that will help to increase the comfortability level of board members. The thing to do.
I'd like to comment also on the concept of the teachable moments. There's also an opportunity to educate a board member without appearing to educate them, and that would be through conversations about prospects, strategy conversations, whereby you begin to talk with them very simply. If you want to ask someone to review a list of potential, area people with wealth, to go through the list and help them understand, well, we are looking for people who have gift capacity of X, to begin to talk them through the kinds of considerations that we hope they will internalize so they can be better at fulfilling this role as potentially fundraisers for the organization. And I'll stop there.
Well, no, I think that's a great opportunity to segue into those expectations that leaders have of board members and to kind of piggyback upon that idea.
Well, I'm going to move a little bit quickly because we're moving a bit slowly so far. So basically, we have expectations of each other when we collaborate in our work on a day-to-day basis, and the same is true when you're talking about the organizational leadership and the board. And so the kinds of things that the CEO or you as the Director of Development or Vice President for Advancement, you want to be able to collaborate with your board members. This is not necessarily a hierarchical relationship. You need to be able to talk openly and have a discussion and collaborate. Institutions hope their board members will come with initiative and ideas. Sometimes the ideas are a little bit out there, but you need to respond to those things in an appropriate way. But again, we want our folks that are closest to us and in these leadership roles to really be thinking about how can we advance the organization. follow through. It's a challenge for us as professionals in our own fields, and the same challenges out there for our board members. So we hope that and again, these are part of, can be part of the conversation as you are evaluating and recruiting someone to the board to help them understand, again, the nature of the relationship that you're trying to build. Commitment to the organization. Again, it's, as I both have said, we hope that the organizations where they sit on the board is at least among their top philanthropic priorities, if not number one. Again, the willingness to assist in resource development, not just philanthropy. Maybe are they willing to refer students to your college or university? Are they willing to bring someone to the Saturday night concert and to help them, encourage them to buy season tickets? Are they advocating for membership in your museum? So are they helping think creatively about finding other revenue streams that may be available to your institution? And again, we've talked about giving. What does the board hope for and expect? They want to be included. They don't want to simply show up, nod, and go home. They want to be heard. You've invited them to be a part of this very important leadership group, and you and your CEO, or if you're the CEO, need to be willing to listen and to really hear. Doesn't mean you have to do everything they're suggesting, but frankly, the reason you brought them on the board was because they offered something to you. And so to have that discipline and that openness of mind to really engage in conversations is important. The regular kind of stuff, we keeping up to date on our plans, on our progress against plans. What's been the list? Did we win an award for something? Did we achieve an objective? Make sure your board members are the first to hear about that, not just the good, but also the bad. When something goes wrong, don't let your board members read about it or in the newspaper or hear about it on the radio. And formal and informal outreach, baby's born, new job, received the Chamber of Commerce award, those kinds of things. Again, just keep up. It's not like dating. You have to sustain the relationship. Again, we talked about these things, but the board meetings themselves, there should be clear expectations for the role at a board meeting. If there are issues to be discussed, that they have been briefed, they've been provided, they're being asked to sign off on a budget, then make sure they've had the data, the spreadsheet, well in advance of the meeting so they can review it and be thoughtful about their questions. Again, provide a forum for them to offer advice, maybe in a board meeting, maybe offline. But again, creating those opportunities for meaningful engagement. They are special. They're dedicating a bunch of time to your organization. They're hopefully committing significant investments of money. Make sure that what you ask them to do are commensurate with their personal abilities and interests. You would ask Michael Bloomberg to stuff envelopes. On the flip side, you wouldn't ask the wonderful volunteer who's worked at the SPCA for years to help negotiate a bank loan. And so you want to make sure you understand, again, what they offer, what their abilities are, what they're interested in doing. Now, Michael Bloomberg might want to have a nice, quiet, relaxing afternoon stuffing envelopes, but you have to understand that. And then, of course, appropriate recognition. And that doesn't mean necessarily tchotchkes or elaborate kinds of tasks or tactics, but rather simply a thoughtful note, a thoughtful phone call to thank them for what they've been doing.
And now that Lori has kind of given you some of these expectations that board members can have, what really motivates them is fulfilling all of these expectations, but more specifically kind of going through this list. Of course, personal satisfaction, I want to connect this with the last bullet point, which is money follows experience. And what we mean here is that of building upon that engagement and that hot button passion that Lori had mentioned, but providing board members with first-person perspectives or experiences. I think that this immersion and experiences is the best motivator, and of course, once you have a really good experience with the organization of which you're a board member, of course you're going to go out and be more willing to promote the cause and the mission. One example that I have is an organization that I worked with that provided temporary housing for sick and injured children who were hospitalized in their families, was to offer board members basically a night to experience as a family member would who has a sick or injured child in the hospital. And by participating in this share night, the board member essentially understands from a first-person perspective the fears, the trials, the tribulations, the problems, and all of the emotions that go through a family member's head when they are experiencing this traumatic situation. So being able to recall that will really help to motivate a board member to not only go out and recruit additional board members to join the cause, but to really speak eloquently and passionately about the organization. Something else that I want to mention here for this particular slide, and this kind of fuzzy for small boards, is there are now opportunities for various types of boards within one organization. I know of a lot of organizations that have developed these associate or junior boards, and this is to capture the motivation of the young professional, the young professionals who are looking for not only that opportunity to network, but an opportunity to develop transferable skills that they may not get in their daily jobs. And of course, they are applying to something that they are very passionate about. Of course, and this is in comparison to what I will call a traditional board, in which it's a more seasoned member who is involved and or engaged in the organization. And I definitely think that another motivating factor that plays along with this is logistics, especially for small nonprofit organizations. Going back to what I said at the beginning of the presentation, even though you have most probably have a smaller board than a larger organization, you still don't have to think that way. But you have to be realistic. You don't want to make your board too large that it sometimes feels like a board member, an individual, feels insignificant, or their time or their resources is just kind of a drop in the bucket, if you will. But on the other hand, you don't want to make it too small that the board members feel absolutely stretched and they feel like they have to not only help with communications and special events, but with other governance issues. So try to keep that happy medium, and of course you will get to this point through your board evaluations and other such things. And because
let me just offer one addition to the comment about multiple boards. In your organization, you will need to clearly define, when you use the phrase board, whether it is the governance board or advisory visiting committee type fundraising organization. And within your context and within your culture, to make sure that those you might be talking to a board role understand that it may not be the governing board.
Right. And just because we're running out of time, I will offer, we've provided some tools and templates like I mentioned here. You'll see a sample job description following along with a criteria grid which helps you put in place effective and high-performing board members, and a sample report card that we had mentioned earlier in our presentation. But at this time, does anyone have any questions, Catherine?
There is one question, Farah, that was asked. What are the most critical committees or officer positions a board should have?
Laura, let you take a stab at that first.
Well, aside from the fiduciary, finance, audit, and perhaps investment, it in many ways depends upon the mission and vision of your organization. I think beyond the three fiduciary would be the nominating or the committee on trusteeship, both of which are involved with selection, recruiting, members to the board, and then should have corresponding responsibility for, forgive the word, evaluating the performance of individual board members relative to the expectations that were created or explained when they were recruited. Beyond that, to follow up on a point Farrah touched on, the other question you have to ask yourselves is, if you are a smaller organization, how many committees can you reasonably staff in an effective way? Volunteers are they're an important part of our organizations and our culture. They do take time to staff, and they take time to staff well. So really ask yourself, again, why would we want a committee, aside from those that may be specified within your bylaws, and again, as I said, finance, audit, and senior moment here, but those three financial committees plus the nominating committee, what more, small college, it might be student affairs, it might be, I guess we should say, obviously, a development or advancement committee. And if you have meaningful work to do, and so that the convening of that committee and the work that would occur in between meetings is meaningful and of value.
Okay, I think that wraps it up for us. I do want to take a moment to thank you all for joining us, and again to remind you that if you do have further questions, Catherine will be staying online for the next 10 minutes. And then to again say thank you for participating in our webinar series. We hope you have found it very helpful. And if you have further questions or would like to discuss any information about how to improve your development program specific to your organization, please feel free to email us. My email address is on the screen. And thank you so very much, and good luck to you.